This is not what I'm supposed to be showing you. Better. All right, can everybody see text? Good.
Yeah.
I'm so glad when I don't have a user error. Daniel made reference to this text and this issue, and so I don't know if we'll spend all evening on it, but I could not, respond to his question. So here's what happened. In last week's Parsha, it says, Israel cleaved to Baal Peor, and God was furious at Israel. Now, what's Baal Peor? Right? Baal Peor is the name of a non-Israelite god worshipped by the Moabites. Right? So already it's got, first of all, that God doesn't exist. And secondly, the Moabites worship it. So it's got two strikes against it already. And the third thing is, that the rituals of Baal Peor involve some sort of sexual behavior, right? Peor, by the way, is the name of a mountain in Moab, right? So, God is really not happy with what's going on and wants, Moses and the people to take action. God says to Moses, take all the leaders of the people, meaning the ones who are participating in this barbarity, and impale them facing the sun. Oh. That sounds cheery. And God's fury will be rescinded from Israel. Moshe said to the judges of Israel, each man should kill his people who are cleaving to Baal Peor. In other words, if it's somebody from your tribe, go get him. And behold, there was an Israelite man who came, and he brought the Midianite woman before his brethren in the sight of Moses and the congregation of the Israelites as they were crying at the entrance to the meeting. So what happens? Pinchas, star of our show, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron a Cohen, saw this, and he got up from within the congregation, took a spear in his hand, pursued the Israelite man to the tent, and he stabbed both of them right through the gut. And the plague upon the Israelites was stopped. Okay? That's who Pinchas is. That's what he does. By our standards today, that sounds pretty harsh. So, how should we feel about it? I mean, even the rabbis had serious problems with this. So we see later on, now at the beginning of this week's Parsha, God spoke to Moses saying, Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the Cohen, rescinded my fury from the Israelites by displaying upon them his passion for me, so that I did not finish off the Israelite people in my passion. Therefore say, I am giving him my covenant of peace, and it will be a covenant of eternal priesthood for him and his progeny after him, because he took impassioned action for his God, thus making expiation for the Israelites. Okay? So that's the reward for his zealous action. All right? And, I think you have to be a real believer in the sanctity of the Torah not to have a problem with how this issue is dealt with. Right? It's pretty clear in the text of the Torah that God approves of the behavior of Pinchas and rewards him for that behavior.
So, Rabbi?
Yes, Stephen.
So why isn't this murder?
Why isn't it murder?
Yeah.
Well, one could justify it on the grounds of being capital punishment. In other words, God said, this is the judgment that is being passed on these people. And so Pinchas is just the agent of the court, so to speak.
But that is pretty so to speak.
Yeah.
There was no trial and no sentence.
Well, there was a sentence, all right, but there was certainly no trial, and it's there was a convening of judges, right? And that is at God's behest. That is, Moses says, yes, you should carry this out, but Pinchas unilaterally just goes ahead. And not only that, God rewards him.
Well, in this case, the Israelite and the Midianite were blatantly committing the crime in public.
And it was a real crime.
Okay. If someone were to do that today, would we argue for capital punishment?
Let's not try to judge actions 3,500 years ago
Fair enough.
through today's lens.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
We have freedom of religion in this country.
Say, which could lead to problems of its own, as we see here.
Yeah.
No, I mean, people who want to worship Baal Peor, let them do it because we have freedom of religion.
Or as a famous Jewish leader once said, lozum gay. Right?
And we see a lot going on in our country right now of judging people from a few hundred years ago by a standard of today.
Mm-hmm.
It's creating
Tearing
problems.
down statues.
Well, that's interesting because, one can argue that the farther away we get from the Torah, the more disapproving the commentators become of Pinchas. And of course, it's harder to argue with God than with people who put up statues. But it's a problem. And we don't have an easy answer. So I want to show you some of the answers that have been discussed within the tradition.
I have a quick question, Rabbi.
Please.
At the very beginning, it says Israel cleaved to Baal Peor. Is that cleaved in this context meaning the same thing it would mean in other references to Israelites cleaving to our God? I guess what I'm trying to say is that does it itself have a sexual overtone to it?
Well, yeah, I think it's different from when it says cleave to God, because of the fact that the worship of Baal Peor involved acts involving what we consider to be sexual immorality. Right? So
that's how they worship.
Yeah. So I think it's different. I think when it says Israel cleaved to Baal Peor, that yes, there is the possibility of a sexual connotation to that. No, it's the same word that we use. A man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife.
Okay, so what it is in Hebrew, the same word in Numbers as it is in Genesis, that phrase.
Yeah, I mean, let me just double.
The Hebrew here is least note, which is obviously sexual.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess it also denotes to me, it implies that it was for Israel, they were replacing their God with a different God, but the relationship was going to be the same.
Yeah, it is a different word. The word for cleave usually is davak, and here it uses, as Michael said, uses the word samad, vayitzamed, Yisrael leva'al pa'or. So, all the more reason to assume that, yes, it involves a sexual connotation.
But in the Jewish way of using that word, I forget what it was, it's a good thing, and here it's a bad thing.
It's a different word.
Different
Okay?
word.
Because it's a different word, right? That's where I wasn't phrasing the question right.
Davak does have a sexual connotation, but
There's nothing wrong with that.
Used relating to God, it isn't to be intended that way.
Okay.
The word samad means much more like to adhere. It's much more physical. In modern Hebrew, the phrase that comes to my mind is semed chemed, a loving couple.
Okay, I have one.
Obviously means a husband and wife.
Major.
I have one more question before you proceed.
Carry on.
You said here are the answers to the question. And I don't mean that sarcastically, honestly don't. What is the question? What are we trying to decide here? Whether Pinchas was being a good guy or a bad guy, or what are the answers we're getting ready to read?
So in my mind, thank you for clarifying that, Daniel, because it's a really good question. In my mind, the issue is not whether Pinchas is a good guy or a bad guy. The issue is, how have Jews understood Pinchas?
Okay.
Did we, so in the Torah, clearly he's a good guy. He did what God wanted to be done. And over time, Jews became, for a variety of reasons, uncomfortable with that. Right? Or, in some cases, they were uncomfortable with it, but rationalized it a bit. Right?
Okay.
The way I would prefer to look at this is, I don't mean to suggest that the Torah is a bunch of stories and it's all fiction, right? But I want to look at this as if Pinchas were a fictional character. And we know how he was seen in one time. How is he seen in other times? And is it and sometimes it's a more complicated character than just the one who emerges in the reading of the Torah.
Well, I'm interested in, and I'm trying to read and listen at the same time here. I didn't have time to read it before, but I understand there is also, in addition to questioning Pinchas doing a good thing, people criticize Moses for not succeeding in stopping what the Israelites were doing, and actually Pinchas was the one who got the job done, so to speak. So I'd like to see whether anybody's going to go there.
Yeah, well, Pinchas, as you say, got the job done. That's one way to put it. But clearly from the text, Moses also wants to see those who are engaged in this activity punished capitally. Is that a word? I guess. All right. So now, let's look at this first midrash at the bottom of the first page. Pinchas ben Elazar saw, knew Other people didn't see, everybody saw. But this person, this person had acted before everyone. And so Pinchas ben Elazar saw the incident, and with a certain amount of anachronism here, suggests that Pinchas was reminded of the halacha, which suggests one who is intimate with an Aramean woman is attacked by zealous avengers. That's written elsewhere in the Talmud, right? So Pinchas got up from within the congregation. From where did he stand? I mean, what's the point of saying he got up from within the congregation? Rather, they were deliberating about the matter, whether this person is liable for death or not. Pinchas got up and he made the decision. So of course he's liable to death, and he took a spear and he stabbed him. Right? That's one verdict about our text. Right? Not only is Pinchas justified, but he's acting on behalf of the halacha.
He's also acting while everybody else is sitting around.
And while everyone is sitting around, he's carrying out the law. Right?
The halacha, which only came up later.
Which only came up later. Right?
I'm sorry, what do you mean by it only came up later?
This passage, one who is intimate with an Aramean woman is attacked by zealous avengers.
Oh, that's Talmud. I see. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, fine. That's fine. I got it.
Yeah. Okay. So
I guess I'm concerned, though, about Pinchas' urgency, that it has to be done now at this moment. Where's the thought? Where's the consideration?
There's a plague. We got to stop the plague.
Yeah, what was the plague anyway?
So let's go back a little bit into, again, last week's Parsha.
I think I already asked you this question during the week.
Well, let's look at what it says. All right. So here's the beginning of chapter 25. All right. All right. I showed you the passage where it says, the wrath of God was inflamed against Israel. Right? Okay. And so, at the end of verse 8 in chapter 25, Pinchas stabbed both of them, and the plague was stopped from the children of Israel.
I'm asking what is that plague referring to?
Does not say what the plague was, but it was a plague.
People were dying.
And people are dying.
But there's no mention of it before. The idea was for them, the reason that 24,000, the reason that God told Moses to tell the people to kill the ringleaders was so that they wouldn't be cleaving to Baal. So it's like a new thing has been thrown in at the very end. The plague either refers to the sins of the Israelites, or it refers to the consequences of that, which is that people were being killed for their actions by other Israelites, or there is a plague like we more traditionally think about it, people were getting sick and dying. But if that's the case, that last one's the case, it came out of nowhere.
Yes, that's exactly correct. Okay. And I think that's the reality, because the Torah doesn't talk beforehand about how this plague got started. It just says that, God was angry. Right? God was furious at Israel. Right?
Well, the whole idea was to
It says
stop
the
them from,
wrath of the Lord was inflamed against Israel. Take your pick.
the whole idea was to stop the Israelites from cleaving to Baal. So if after all this stuff that's happening, they stop, then that plague to me is referring to their sin. That's what they
I
want.
don't think that's the reality because of what you see in verses 8 and 9 in chapter 25. Right? So he stabs them, and the plague upon the Israelites was stopped.
Yeah.
But those who died in the plague were 24,000.
Yeah, which is not. That's a bizarre number. That's a lot of people. How many? I mean,
Right. Apparently, one of the Jerusalem Talmud suggests that they were all from one tribe, from the tribe of Shimon. Why? Because apparently it says something about 24,000 in that tribe. But either way, yeah, there's a real plague. And the plague was stopped. Right? So maybe that was why they didn't, Stephen, to answer your question, that's why there wasn't a whole lot of deliberating about it, because if you believe that this is what is causing the plague, then you got to get there quickly, right? Get the vaccine. And he inoculated this couple, and that was it.
Doesn't that imply, though, if I'm following your logic, which is very good logic, then there are two, trying to look at this historically at this point, there are two stories here that have gotten interwoven in a similar manner to the one that we all know about, where Joseph was either sold or captured by two different Arab tribes. I forget who it was, the Midnights and Ishmaelites or somebody.
Or if you want two stories that are intertwined, Dantan and
Well, that's exactly
his
what,
rebellion and the other guy's rebellion.
right. So the plague here I mentioned out of nowhere indicates to me that that is a different storyline that somebody has grabbed from the same event that had a different storyline. Sorry, my dog's barking.
Ali asked a question on the chat. Is it 24,000 who died because of the Moabite sex scandal, whereas 3,000 died in the golden calf affair? Yeah, we did have a plague before, but the 3,000 were killed by the Levites.
And there was a plague where they were saved by looking up at a snake on a stick.
Yeah.
But that's a very good question, in that that's 8 times, this plague killed 8 times as many people as died at the golden calf. I mean, that makes it a tremendously huge event. How many people died with Korah? Does anybody?
What 250 men in the
Like a
group with Korah?
I'm talking about Korah, but I thought it was in the
But
thousands.
Korah, again, it's a limited camp. Not everybody supports him.
All right. Well, I'm holding back your progress here, Rabbi. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. There is another plague, however, in the time of Korah. Right? The dead in the plague of Korah were 14,700, besides those who were dead over the matter of Korah, which was, a couple hundred.
Was that the one with the snake on a stick?
That's the one with the staffs.
Now I'm asking about the one where if they looked up and saw the snake at the.
That's a different one.
Mhm. How many died in that other one
This
with the
is
snake?
in chapter 17 of Numbers. So if you want to look there, you can see that what Moses does in this is they collect a staff from each tribe, and the staff of Aaron produces a blossom, and the other staffs don't. And it's a way to kind of prove the role that Aaron has. Okay. And they,
Michael,
but I don't have in Korah, I don't find a a conclusion to that regarding a snake. So I know what you're talking about, but I can't remember
It was in
exactly.
Hukat last week.
That's Hukat, yeah.
Yeah, and it just says a large multitude. It doesn't give an actual number.
oh,
On Brav.
But the people quarrel with Moses after Miriam dies, and there's no water because, Miriam, right? And so
Verse 6, chapter 21.
yeah, I'm coming to it. And then there's the bronze serpent. Yeah, the people get angry at Moses again because they're going in the wrong direction, right? They're not going to the promised land. And they say, why did you bring us up from Egypt to die in the wilderness? So God sent these fiery serpents, and they bit the people. So there's the plague of serpents, and then God tells Moses, build this brass serpent, a bronze serpent. Okay? And if a serpent bit a man, he would look at the bronze serpent and live. Chapter 21, verse 9. So that's what you were referring to in. I maybe we should have just devoted a whole evening to plagues. That would be appropriate.
yeah.
So, moving on to the next Pinchas ben Elazar.
So Ali asks
I liked it.
another question. Were the Moabite women considered a sort of a sexual fifth column? We always like to blame the outsider, but really, sometimes the problem is with us. The problem is not just the fact that there are Moabite women. It's how the Israelite men respond to them. And Ali also adds that according to his commentary, I don't know which commentary this is you have, it says it was an epidemic, this magefa, this plague, that it was a venereal disease that killed 24,000.
They all caught it
That's
by watching.
probably more a commentary on how the rabbis felt about Moab. Okay?
You get VD just by looking at them.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there were actually 24,000 Israelites who had engaged in sex with Moabite women. I don't think that was it. I think
Midianite.
Moabite, Midianite, but but it's, Baal Peor is a Moabite problem. Even if Cosby is a Midianite woman. All right. So, moving back to the text. So, next. Again, what did Pinchas see? Rav said, this is the top of the second page. Rav said he saw the incident. He was reminded of the halakha. He said to Moses, great uncle. I love, like they're sitting around in a yeshiva or something, right? Great uncle, didn't you teach us when you came down from Mount Sinai, one who is intimate with an Aramean woman is attacked by zealous avengers? Moses said to him, the one who reads the letter should be the messenger. What does Moses mean by that?
What are you going to do about it, Pinchas?
Yeah. If that's, if that's the message you're getting, then maybe you ought to carry it out. And Shmuel said he has a different opinion about what Pinchas saw. He said he saw that there is no wisdom or insight contrary to God. That's the verse from Proverbs, right? That any place where there is a violation of God's name, one does not show honor to the teacher. In other words, don't go to Moses and ask him to carry out the sentence. Get with the business of it yourself, right? So again, this is a clear justification of Pinchas for what he did and why he carried it out and why he carried it out immediately. Yes?
I think someone else was going to speak. Go ahead. No? Maybe it's because I read it someplace else from a different source. But when I read this, it feels to me like Moses sitting there going, fine, I can't figure out what to do. I've killed all the ringleaders. Nothing's working. If you think you know better, you little snot, go do it yourself. In other words, there's a sense of frustration that this little priesty guy is coming up to him, and threatening his authority.
All right.
Those are the things that I read.
Remember, Daniel, that this is just one midrashic reading of the text. It's one portrait of Pinchas. Now, so, but in this reading, I don't think Pinchas is just this snotty little guy. In this reading, Pinchas is like a rabbi. I mean, there are no rabbis, of course, but he's like a rabbi. He's reminding Moses of the law.
So why does Moses say, okay, you've read the letter of the law, you think you know what you're talking about, you go out and be the messenger.
Right, you remembered the law, therefore you carry it out.
Let's also remember, Moses is about 120 years old. His warring days are long behind him.
Yes.
Whereas Pinchas, he is much, much younger, and he could wield that spear.
Apparently so.
Well, he does it, so.
Yes. Enough said about that. So, here's the text from the Jerusalem Talmud. Right? What was the Pinchas saw? Again, you saw the incident as reminded of the halakha. Those who are intimate with Aramean women are attacked by zealous avengers. It is taught, meaning against the will of the sages. In other words, that may be the law, but that was not what the rabbis wanted the law to be. And Pinchas also behaved against the will of the sages. And going even farther, Rabbi Yehuda ben Pazi said they wanted to excommunicate him and would have, were it not for a Holy Spirit that jumped in on his behalf and said, it will be a covenant of eternal priesthood for him and his progeny after him. In other words, God rewards him jumping in on his behalf before they could excommunicate him. So in this view, Pinchas, God has to rescue Pinchas because otherwise they would have carried out a different law against him. They would have thrown him out.
Maybe the sages need to re-examine their point of view, considering it's totally opposite from God's.
Maybe
That's the
they
problem.
just understood God differently.
I don't think it's too unusual for people in the Talmud to, maybe it's more blatant here than it normally is, but they question things about, I don't want to say they question God, but don't
Well,
they
go
question,
ahead.
huh?
Sure.
Well, I've read maybe 3 pages of Talmud in my life, so I don't know. But don't they often question a decision that God has made, and they banter it back and forth?
Absolutely. And this is Exhibit A.
This one does seem rather strong, though.
Mhm. Yeah, this is
Didn't
the
we
biggie.
have, well, what was it we read recently? I don't remember the situation, but the quote was something that the sages saying, oh gosh, it just went out of my brain. I'm sorry, the thought went out of my brain. I got distracted there. Oh, they said, yes, you're quoting the law correctly, and we don't observe that law.
Yes.
In what context was that? That wasn't here. They aren't talking about.
The phrase in Hebrew, and it occurs many times in the Talmud. Halacha ve'ein morin kain. Okay? In other words, it's the law, but we don't teach this. Meaning we don't carry this out.
That's a lot. That's an incredible statement in my mind.
And it happens how many times? Many?
Yeah, I don't know how many, but I'd have to do a search on it and have to search all the various forms of that. But the basic phrase is halacha ve'ein morin kain. This is the halacha, but we don't teach that. We don't carry that out.
We don't approve of that.
They don't approve of it. Meaning, they argue with God. They say, okay, God, you gave the law, that's the law, but we don't like it. And we don't have to do it, and we don't have to teach it. So, I was going to say something I shouldn't say, but no.
So was it more than a dozen?
I don't know.
Mm.
No, but it's an exceedingly well-known phrase in the Talmud.
Isn't there a phrase that says that the law has to be interpreted in each generation by its judges and sages?
Yes. However, they try to put some limitations on that at times, meaning that only if one generation is greater in wisdom and in number than the generation where the law was made, which is kind of difficult because there's also this doctrine that says that, the farther you get from Sinai, the less wisdom there is out there. kind of a handicap we're playing with as rabbis.
It definitely says you shall interpret the law for each generation, and it says thou shalt not add or subtract. And to me, that's the beauty of Judaism, is that we have these two seemingly contradictory statements, but we can spend centuries, millennia, arguing why God has these two different laws that seem different, or these two different. It's not God. Let me rephrase it. That there is multiple ways to interpret the paradoxes that we find in halakha.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's neat.
Okay.
Okay.
You're right. You're right. It's a very interesting and fruitful phenomenon in Judaism, and it tends to militate against any kind of fundamentalism. I don't know why I thought I was going to get through so much material tonight, because clearly that's not happening. But let's take a look at just the last two little pieces here. Again, from Midrash Rabbah, the Holy Blessed One said, by law, he should take his reward. By law, meaning that Pinchas carried out the law, even if the law wasn't ideal. So it says, therefore say that I'm giving him my covenant of peace. Great is the peace that was given to Pinchas, for the world only runs through peace, and the Torah itself is entirely peace. Right? In other words, Pinchas needs peace. And that's why God gives him a brit shalom, a covenant of peace. Right?
This must be the source of something I read that just was, it wasn't quoting, it was just making it a statement. And that is that the reason God gave the covenant of peace was that Pinchas's zealotry, his passion, was too much.
Yes.
And this was a mitigator.
Yes, that's the point of this midrash.
Okay.
And finally, just to underscore the point you were making a moment ago, Daniel, right? So look at this little piece from the Talmud. There were grave diggers who buried a person on the first day of Shavuot. Now, let me tell you, there's no traditional rabbi that would do a funeral on the first day of Shavuot, okay? And this was clearly in the diaspora. How do we know that?
There's only one day of Shavuot in the Holy Land.
But yeah, there's only one day of Shavuot. To wait one day is not a big deal for a holiday. To wait 2 days is a very big deal, right? And therefore, there were people who argued that you could do a burial on second day Yontif, but certainly not first day Yontif, right? But if you didn't do a burial on either first day or second day, could be 3 days after someone died before they got buried, and that was a no-no, right? I mean, today anything goes as far as that's concerned. We wait for people to come halfway across the world to come for a funeral, right? But that's, but that brings in a different principle. Here, you're talking about mostly people who lived in the same place most of their lives. Most of their family were right there. Person dies, and the grave diggers buried him on the first day of Shavuot. And the issue is, how did the rabbis respond? Rav Papa excommunicated them and disqualified them as witnesses. But Rav Huna, son of Rav Yoshua, deemed them qualified. So the two rabbis involved here have a little argument. And Papa said, they were found guilty. Meaning, was there any question that they broke the law? Rav Huna said, well, maybe, but they thought they were doing a mitzvah. They did it because they didn't want the dead body to be sitting around for 3 days. So it was a mitzvah to do it. Never mind the fact that it's the first day Yontif. They thought they were doing a mitzvah. Rav Papa said, but I excommunicated them. You're deeming them qualified as witnesses after I excommunicated them? It's like he's, calling him a shagutz or something, So Rav Huna said, what they thought was the sages, the only reason they excommunicated us was the sages were enabling us to atone. And, but it really wasn't wrong what we did from Rav Huna's point of view. They did something they shouldn't have done, but they thought they were doing a mitzvah, and they, the sages gave them a little room to atone, so now they're okay. And Rav Huna counts them as witnesses.
So apparently Rav Papa did not, he stopped the argument right there.
Rav Papa apparently had a stroke at this point. He's very unhappy at this point, but but that's where the argument rests. And the point is that, even when the law is crystal clear, sometimes there's room to maneuver.
There's always room to maneuver.
And that's how the rabbis later on responded to Pinchas, right? They would have excommunicated him. He behaved against the will of the sages, even if he was doing the will of God.
Rabbi?
Yes, no.
Let's bring Pinchas forward to say the 1930s.
Okay.
We've got Bonnie and Clyde out there going around murdering a bunch of people. And it's obvious that Bonnie and Clyde are doing it. And so we have the sheriff that goes and grabs a posse and mows them down with a bunch of machine guns.
Yeah. I was not there in the 1930s, but I did see the movie. That was kind of gruesome there. But yeah, people got tired of having their money stolen.
Does anybody take the side not of Pinchas or that Moses was burnt out or any of the things we're talking about and saying the motivations of Pinchas were irrelevant? As I said earlier on, he got the job done. The results of his actions were very positive. Right after this is finished, the story is told, you move on to counting people and you deal with the daughters. Life goes on because of what Pinchas did. We don't know whether we would have ever made it to the other side of the Jordan if it wasn't for Pinchas. So the fact that he was, anything you can say is about his personality, he was too zealous, he wasn't zealous enough,
it's not so relevant.
He got it done.
That is one way of looking at it. And if you want to take the
does anybody else take that view though? Do any of the rabbis say it's results that matter? Because I hear that a lot nowadays.
The rabbis will say that there are other results, right? Del, it's true that the sheriff and maybe the FBI and maybe a lot of other people were involved in this posse, and they carried out the law. And it's also possible that they that Bonnie and Clyde would never have been taken alive. Right?
That is entirely possible. And how many people would Bonnie and Clyde have shot down trying to avoid being captured?
Right. Right. At the same time, you know, if you just went out and tried to slaughter criminals, right, rather than bring them to justice, there are other results to that, some of which are detrimental to society.
Well, that's the problem the rabbis had. Are we going to say it's okay to behave as Pinchas did? Every time you see something you don't approve of, you go take a spear and kill him?
Yes. And I would argue that that's one of the things that people have to evaluate now in the wake of all of these deaths of Black people at the hands of police. And, you know, maybe this person committed a crime and needed to be brought to justice. But if you're Pinchas, then sometimes all you see is a sword. And sometimes if you're the law, all you see is carrying out the law like Pinchas.
Well, I would say that some of the police officers are not doing right, but others are defending themselves.
Yeah, of course. That's also the law. And that's the way it should be.
For what it's worth, I was not advocating Pinchas's approach.
Right.
I'm actually advocating due process. I'm a real believer in due process. I was making a more complicated argument.
Yeah, and that's fine. I think we just, you know, we have to recognize the potential problems in each version of Pinchas, in each approach to Pinchas that we see in the tradition. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Shabbat Shalom. And
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
do it again
Shabbos.
next week.
Shalom.
Good Shabbos. Thank you, Daniel.
Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.